I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1768 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. The title of this podcast is Vietnam Veteran News. The Vietnam word in the title refers to the war that the Americans fought over there in Southeast Asia back in the 60s. The veteran word in that title refers to yours truly, your podcaster, Mac Payne. Notice it doesn't have an S on it, like veterans. The veteran refers to me and whatever I want to say on this podcast, because it's my podcast. The third word is news. In this episode, the news word is going to be featured. I'm going to share with you some news of the day about a topic that everybody in the world is talking about on this day, June the 15th, 2020. And that is the coronavirus 19, or 1984, as I call it. I'm going to talk about it today because what's happening in this country today reminds me of that line that came out of the Vietnam War that everybody likes to repeat and make fun of it. And that was, we had to destroy the village to save it. That's what a lot of naysayers about the Vietnam War love to cite. There is conjecture out there that that is not exactly what was stated. The idea might be true, but that's what everybody says today, just like this. It's widely assumed that Nathan Bedford Forrest, the notable Confederate general in the Civil War, stated, "I got there firstest with the mostest." That's not exactly what he said. This is what actually happened. One time when he was describing to someone one of his many victories over Union forces and how he did it, he merely explained, "I took a shortcut. I got there first with more troops." That's how he won. That got turned into, "I got there firstest with the mostest." I can see why, because Nathan Bedford Forrest did not have a real good command of the English language. But he got started and it's with us today. Same thing with, we had to destroy the village in Vietnam to save it. I hope whoever said something like that will remain anonymous. They need to be. But we do need to be careful because that could happen. People decide to destroy something to save it. You would think that could be what's going on in this country today. Recently in the Washington Post, there appeared an opinion piece that backs up my viewpoint 100%. We have to be careful with this virus. It does kill people, but we also have to be careful with our country and our economy. We don't want to destroy it. I'm going to share the opinion piece with you titled, "We Can't Keep the Economy Closed Forever." It was submitted by none other than Henry Olsen, a columnist for the Washington Post. When I saw this, I almost got up and cheered. But since I'm sitting here in the podcast bunker alone, nobody would have heard it. But that's the way I felt. You're going to feel the same way when you hear it. Also, when you discover some other things about this virus, it may make you a little upset. For instance, it is an old folks killer. The vast majority of the people dying from coronavirus are over 80 and they have underlying conditions. The experts say that most of these people are counted as victims of COVID virus would have probably died anyway in a few weeks. The Hong Kong flu that hit this country in 1968 was a killer of young people and children. COVID-19 seems to kill older people. You'll also find out that when states realized that the federal government would give them money for anyone who died of the COVID virus, their numbers went way up. For instance, Up in New York State, if somebody drank too much at the local pub and were driving home and hit a tree and died, and then when they were checking out the body and found out that the driver tested positive for COVID virus, he would be counted as a COVID virus death. You're going to understand more about that after you hear Henry Olsen's column titled, "We Can't Keep the Economy Closed Forever." Let's take a look at it. Dateline, Washington, D.C. Cases and hospitalizations for the novel coronavirus are on the rise in many states, leading some to question whether the nation is reopening too quickly or haphazardly. They are wrong. Hear, hear, Henry. Thank you for stating the truth. Continuing. The novel coronavirus created a global panic in February and March for three simple reasons. It was spreading rapidly. We knew little about it, and there was no vaccine or known effective pharmaceutical treatment. Had governments around the world not acted, millions more people in the United States would have contracted the disease. An unknown number of Americans, surely in the hundreds of thousands or perhaps as many as 1 million, would have died. Preventing that horrific toll and the social damage it would have caused was well worth the economic cost the lockdowns caused. We now know much more about COVID-19 and its frightening cost to people's livelihoods. The coronavirus appears to be less fatal than originally thought, with the risk of death highly correlated with factors of age and prior health. Did you get that? It's mostly old people who are sick that die from the disease. The cost was also much higher than many had thought. Although the true number of unemployed people is a matter of debate, the data show that as many as 27.5% of Americans lost their jobs or had their hours scaled back as a result of the shutdowns. That's more than 30 million Americans, at a minimum, who were hit hard economically. We simply cannot sustain that level of economic catastrophe much longer. The massive multi-trillion-dollar aid packages that Congress passed enabled most families to avoid economic ruin. Government data show that personal income actually rose by 10.5% last month, mainly because the combination of the up to $1,200 per adult stimulus checks and enhanced unemployment eligibility and support levels more than made up for lost wages. But that was financed by a record amount of borrowed money. The federal government cannot continue to borrow or simply print money out of thin air indefinitely. Nor can people recover their economic well-being without a significant relaxing of the lockdowns and social distancing rules. Our modern service economy generates employment only when people can share experiences with one another, traveling, dining out, enjoying concerts or shows, getting a pedicure or a massage, or even a haircut. But all require close contact with others to make the experience enjoyable and profitable. Lockdowns, tight capacity controls, and 6-foot social distancing measures make many of these activities impossible and thus throw those who provide them out of work. This month's labor market report makes this crystal clear. While all sectors of the economy were affected by the shutdowns, those that inherently involve close personal interactions were devastated. These data show that the country lost about 18 million jobs between March and May. More than 6 million of those were in leisure and hospitality, a nearly 40% decline in employment for the sector. Almost 2 million more were lost in retail trade, with furniture, electronics, clothing, and sporting goods stores losing a third or more of their employees. More than 40% of our total job losses were from just those two sectors where personal interaction is unavoidable. Other similar sectors were also hit hard. More than 2 million jobs were lost in education and health services as doctors' offices and daycare centers closed. Roughly 1 million jobs were sacrificed in state and local governments' education sectors as schools and universities closed. 1 million more jobs were lost in other sectors where people meet people in close quarters, such as air and local transit transportation and personal and laundry services. All told, a minimum of 2/3 of America's lost jobs are in the industries whose businesses is to have people interact with people. These purely economic figures also do not account for the lockdown's mental health effects. Research has found a dramatic increase in symptoms of depression and anxiety since the lockdown started. Human happiness is the measure of the quality of life, so much so that its pursuit was enshrined in our Declaration of Independence as one of humanity's 3 natural rights. Now that right hangs in the balance. These facts mean rises in the coronavirus infection and hospitalization rates have to be put into context. We must minimize the potential loss of life, but public health measures must also be weighed against the cost of millions of ruined lives. Keeping the economy closed and the lockdowns tight would be fatal to America itself. To do this would be the public health equivalent of the famous quote from a dispatch during the Vietnam War. It was necessary to destroy the village in order to save it. That is one of those statements that would be described by Pete Hogwallop of the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In the following manner. That don't make no sense. That's right. Didn't make any sense back in the Vietnam days to say it was necessary to destroy the village to save it. That's the same thing as saying we have to destroy the economy of our country to save it. Henry Olsen brings out some very good points in here that we can't continue this madness of shutting down the economy. The facts are, whether we're closed down or not, a certain amount of people are going to die in this country. The experts say closing down really does not change that death figure. Also, another fact about COVID-19 84 virus is that it's an old person's disease. It kills older people who have underlying health conditions. Most of those people who die would have died anyway in a few weeks. Does it make a lot of sense to close down the entire economy, especially the part that affects children and their schooling, for some old people who are going to die anyway? Nobody's going to live forever. We do need to take care of our elderly population and do the best we can for them. We also have an obligation to other age groups in our population. The young people, the middle-aged people. We cannot kill the golden goose. As I sit here on this day, June the 15th, 2020, I will tell you that very soon we'll have vaccinations for this virus. We'll also have medicine that'll help cure it. And that before long, we'll be looking back on these days and say, hey, do you remember when the COVID virus was here? It was rough. They closed down the whole economy, and they really didn't have to do that. That's what I predict we'll be saying in a few short months, maybe a year or so. That's the same thing we said about the Hong Kong flu that blew through here in 1968. It did return again in 1969, but we didn't shut down the economy. When someone got sick back then with a Hong Kong flu, they took them to the doctor and gave them some medicine. We got over it, but we didn't shut everything down because of that. True, over 100,000 Americans died from the Hong Kong flu, which is a terrible thing, but we got over it. That's what we're going to do here with this COVID-19 virus. We're going to get over it. Let's just hope our leadership does not do too much damage in the process of saving the country. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is your podcaster, Mac Payne, closing out episode 1768 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
Yeah! How about that? Ain't that a mess?